My pregnant wife gave me an ultimatum. If I save my nephew's life, she will take my unborn child and leave forever. It didn't start with her shouting, or even with the call from my sister, Emily. It all started with that stupid family tradition, the annual barbecue at my parents' place. On that day, 3 weeks ago, everything looked sickeningly perfect. The sun, the smell of grilling meat, the sound of children laughing. Michael, 32, was standing there holding my wife, Sarah. She's 29 and 4 months pregnant with our first child. We had just bought a house, I had a great job in IT, and for the first time in my life, I felt like everything was finally going the way it should. That kind of calm feels like a mockery of fate now. Amidst all the sunny farce was Emily, my older sister. She's 36 and always been my opposite. Flighty, emotional, constantly in debt. But she's my sister, and she has Jamie, her 5-year-old son. Jamie is the only person who can melt her permanent ice. He is everything to her. The only thing was, Jamie wasn't running around with the other kids that day. He was sitting on her lap, pale, listless. She kept apologizing, saying he just had some kind of lingering cold. I didn't pay attention then, just nodded and offered to get her some water. But Sarah, she's a nurse. She has a trained eye, and she immediately grew worried. She went over, felt Jamie's forehead, and then pulled Emily aside. Their conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and I watched as tears filled Emily's eyes the more Sarah spoke. It was strange because Emily never cries. She always keeps her composure. When they came back, Emily just looked at me, and there was a helplessness in her eyes I had never seen. She said Jamie wasn't well. They had been going to doctors for a month. Earlier that week, they had some complex tests done. And yesterday, she got the results. It was what they call acute lymphoblastic leukemia, blood cancer. I remember the news just getting stuck in my throat. All the sounds of the barbecue instantly vanished. I looked at little Jamie, at the thin veins on his temples, at his pale skin, and I couldn't say a word. Emily, like a robot, explained that they urgently needed to start chemotherapy, but ultimately he would need a bone marrow transplant. She and Jamie's father, they weren't a match. She looked me straight in the eye, and it wasn't a question, it was a plea for life. She said the doctors had told her that I, her biological brother, was potentially a match. This was their last hope, their only chance. I immediately agreed without a second thought. He's my nephew, part of me. Of course, I would do anything. Sarah, hearing this, squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. She didn't say anything in front of Emily, but I saw her face turn to stone. 2 days later, I submitted my blood for testing. A week after that, the result came in, which both saved and ruined my life. I was a perfect donor, a 100% match. I was happy I could save Jamie. I called Emily, and she cried tears like she never had, even as a child. I felt like a hero. That same evening, I was sitting in the kitchen, explaining the procedure details to Sarah. It's not too dangerous. They take the cells from the pelvic bone, a minor general anesthetic, a day or 2 in the hospital, then recovery. I told her it was just a week of discomfort, in exchange for Jamie's life. Sarah listened in silence. When I finished, she just looked at me, and there was no pride or relief in her eyes, only cold, steely anger. She put her hand on her stomach, where our baby was growing, and said, "Michael, I forbid you. I will not let you risk yourself." I tried to explain to her that the risk was minimal. It wasn't major surgery. It was just a harvest. But she wouldn't listen. She talked about our baby, how they needed me, and that I had no right to voluntarily go under the knife when we were expecting our first child. Finally, she stood up, her breathing heavy. She said she knew I had already made up my mind and that I had already betrayed her just by agreeing to take the test. She walked to the front door, grabbed her car keys, and before leaving, she turned around. And that's when the ultimatum, the one that crashed my entire perfect world, was delivered. The exact hook I haven't been able to live with for a week. If you walk into that hospital for Jamie, you will never see me or our child again. That is your choice. Your sister or your family. The silence Sarah left behind was heavier than the sound of the slamming door. A physical weight pressing down on my chest, stealing the little oxygen I thought I had left. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of leftover barbecue turning sour in my memory, staring at the spot where she had been, the spot where our future was supposed to blossom. I felt dizzy, like the entire foundation of my adult life. The mortgage, the nursery we painted last weekend, the ultrasound picture taped to the fridge, was suddenly constructed on quicksand. This was the reality of the last 7 days. A slow-motion implosion disguised as a family crisis. I called my friend, Mark, immediately, needing to hear a voice that wasn't family, a voice unburdened by biology or emotional debt. Mark, who knows Sarah and me since college, just listened without interruption, which I needed more than any advice. When I finally finished detailing Sarah's terrifying declaration, that she would effectively abort our relationship and our unborn child's stable home life over my decision to help my sister's son, he let out a long, low whistle. Mike, that's a nuclear option. She means it. I knew she meant it. Sarah doesn't make threats. She states facts, and this felt like the most terrifying, non-negotiable fact I had ever faced. The next few days were a blur of enforced normalcy that felt grotesque. I went to work, sat through meetings about quarterly projections, and replied to emails, all while running 2 parallel internal monologues. One side was calculating the survival probability for Jamie and the ethical imperative to save a child. The other side was picturing Sarah moving out, the empty space in our bed, the crushing loneliness of being a single father who made the wrong choice in a moral dilemma of impossible scale. I kept looking at the baby monitor parts sitting on the dining table, still in their boxes, unopened, symbols of the future I was actively jeopardizing. My mother called on Wednesday, 3 days after Sarah left. She tried to be subtle, asking how we were doing, emphasizing the we. But I could hear the tremor in her voice. I didn't tell her the ultimatum was out there. I just said Sarah needed space to process the news about Jamie. Mom, bless her, took the bait, suggesting that I needed to be strong for both families right now. She stressed how much Emily was relying on me, how Jamie was her whole world, how no one would forgive me if I backed out now that I was confirmed a match. This, of course, only solidified the pressure cooker I was trapped in. When I did manage to speak to Emily, her voice was thin, almost unrecognizable. She didn't pressure me. She was past pressure. She was operating on fumes. She just kept repeating, "Thank you, Michael. Thank you. The doctors need a firm date next week for scheduling the harvest." She mentioned that the initial chemotherapy wasn't working as well as they'd hoped, and that waiting was becoming a luxury they couldn't afford. She said she understood if I needed time, but every second was critical for her little boy. Hearing that, critical seconds, made my stomach clench. I tried calling Sarah on Thursday evening. Sent a text first. "Can we please just talk? Not about the decision, just about us and the baby." No reply. I called again an hour later. Straight to voicemail. The fear started to crystallize into something cold and hard. She was making physical space between us, creating distance that would make returning harder. I walked into the spare room, the one we designated as the nursery, and for the first time, I felt nothing but dread, not excitement. The blue paint suddenly looked cold. The complexity wasn't just saving Jamie versus protecting my new family. It was the nature of the debt. I owe Emily. She always looked out for me when Dad left. She was the one who convinced Mom to let me go to that expensive summer camp when we had zero money. We have that unspoken, messy sibling bond forged in childhood chaos. But Sarah is the person I chose to build a stable, safe future with. And now, the stability she craves is exactly what my commitment to my sister threatens to destroy. I feel like I'm being asked to saw off my own limb to stop someone else's bleeding. And the stump might be the only part of me Sarah wants to keep around. I need to see Sarah, to try and breach this wall she built. But every time I try, I feel the immense shadow of Jamie's need looming over us. The scheduled consultation for the transplant is Monday morning. That gives me 3 days to either save my nephew or lose my wife and child before I even step into that hospital. The internal conflict is eating me alive, turning every moment into a silent negotiation with an absent jury of my own conscience. I keep replaying Sarah's final words, searching for a loophole. A sign she was bluffing, but her tone was granite. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just exist in this suffocating holding pattern, waiting for the final move. The weekend was a torture chamber designed by my own anxiety. I tried reaching Sarah again, left voicemails that I immediately regretted for sounding too desperate, too pleading. She responded only once, late Saturday night, a single cold line via text. I'm at my sister Chloe's place. Don't call my phone until you have made your final decision. I'm done negotiating my child's father's future health. That confirmed it. She wasn't just angry. She was executing a strategic withdrawal, creating maximum space for the inevitable split. My head pounded with the realization that I had less than 48 hours before Monday morning's consultation, and I hadn't spoken a single meaningful word to the woman I vowed to spend my life with in days. Sunday afternoon, I drove over to Chloe's house, a nice two-story suburban colonial that felt miles away from my suddenly toxic reality. I walked up the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs with the frantic rhythm of a trapped animal. I knew this was risky, that I might push her over the edge, but I couldn't face Monday without at least trying to make her understand the sheer impossibility of the choice she presented. I knocked a single, firm rap on the expensive wood. Chloe opened the door, her expression instantly defensive, making it clear I was an unwelcome intruder. She doesn't want to see you, Michael, Chloe said, folding her arms, blocking the entryway like a paid security guard. You've made your priorities clear this past week by ignoring her. Chloe, please, just let me talk to her for 5 minutes. It's about the baby, about our baby. This isn't about Jamie right now. This is about us. I insisted, trying to keep my voice level, fighting the urge to just push past her. I saw Sarah in the background, standing at the kitchen counter, her back rigid, staring out the window. She looked impossibly fragile, yet fiercely resolved. Chloe reluctantly stepped aside, giving me a look that promised immediate termination of this visit if I made one wrong move. I walked into the brightly lit kitchen, the air thick with unspoken accusation. Sarah, I started, my voice rough. We need to talk about the actual risk. I spoke to Dr. Evans again. He was very clear. The procedure for haploidentical donation, even from the pelvis, is standard. It's minimally invasive. I'll be sore, sure, but I will be fine. I will recover fully within 2 weeks. Our baby will be born healthy. Jamie. I paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath, trying to find the center I lost 3 weeks ago. Jamie might not survive without this. He's 5, Sarah. He's family. I cannot look my sister in the eye knowing I could have saved her child and chose not to because I was scared. Sarah turned then. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they held no tears now, just a terrifying emptiness. She gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles were white. You are scared, Michael. You should be scared. You are talking about major surgery when I am carrying your only heir. What if the anesthesia causes a complication? What if the recovery takes longer? What if you get an infection? Have you thought one single moment past the immediate surgery? Because I have. I have thought about you incapacitated while I have labor complications, or worse, I have thought about you being in recovery while our baby comes early. You are not disposable. You are not just a spare part for Emily's mistakes or misfortune. They are not mistakes, Sarah. It's cancer. I exploded, immediately regretting the volume. Chloe flinched. And it is not our cancer. Sarah shot back, her voice rising to match mine, sharp and cutting. This is your sister's problem, Michael. A problem you are willing to let destroy our future to solve. You are prioritizing the sibling bond you've had since birth over the nuclear family you promised to build with me. You think a 2-week recovery wipes the slate clean? It doesn't. Every time I look at you, I will see the choice you made. I will see that when push came to shove, your loyalty lay with her trauma, not my fear, not our child's security. She walked towards me slowly, deliberately, closing the gap. Chloe stood rooted to the spot, watching the execution. Look at me, Michael. I am pregnant. I am terrified. And I know you. Once you walk in there Monday, you're committed. And the second you consent to that procedure, you have chosen your path. My path is clear. I will not raise a child whose father willingly subjected himself to severe medical risk for someone else when I was vulnerable. I will not live with that constant, low-grade terror that you might not come back whole, or worse, that you might decide you like being the martyr. If you do this, you forfeit your right to be our father. I will take the baby, I will move to be near my parents, and you can visit on scheduled weekends, supervised, until we can sort out the custody arrangements, because I will protect my child from your recklessness. The finality of her tone was absolute. This wasn't a fight. It was a sentence being read aloud. I looked from her unwavering, determined face to the silent, judging presence of Chloe, and then back to Sarah, the woman carrying my future. My commitment to Jamie felt like a crushing moral victory that was simultaneously guaranteeing my personal ruin. I had less than 24 hours to decide who I was going to let down the hardest: my dying nephew and my desperate sister, or the mother of my child who just set the exit strategy in stone. The pressure had become unbearable, a physical vice around my skull, and I knew that whatever I chose, the fallout would be immediate and catastrophic, consuming everything good I had managed to build. I left Chloe's house feeling less like a man and more like a piece of wreckage tossed around by an emotional tsunami. Sunday night dissolved into Monday morning without sleep. I paced our living room, the carpet worn thin by my footsteps over the last week, running scenarios in my head. If I pulled out, I would have to face Emily, explain that I chose my wife over my nephew, a decision that would brand me as selfish in the eyes of my entire extended family. A stain that wouldn't fade even if Sarah and I stayed together. If I went through with the procedure, I'd be saving Jamie, but I was effectively signing a divorce decree with Sarah, ensuring I'd be the absent father she already accused me of becoming. The 1-month timeline was shrinking down to a single, agonizing moment. I didn't go to the hospital Monday morning. I called Dr. Evans' office at 7 a.m., my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. I need to postpone. Indefinitely. I need time to sort out a serious personal medical situation. The lie tasted like ash. The office assistant was professional but clearly annoyed, noting that this complicated scheduling, as the specialized team was already allocated. I hung up, feeling the first wave of profound relief, quickly followed by the suffocating guilt. I had bought time, but at what cost? I had effectively chosen Sarah, or at least, chosen not to sever the tether to my immediate future family, which meant I had abandoned Jamie. I sat down at the kitchen table, the morning sunlight too bright for the darkness I felt inside, and finally wrote the email to Emily. It was a sanitized version of the truth. Extreme, unexpected complications regarding Sarah's pregnancy. Doctors advise against any non-essential procedures right now. I am devastated, but I cannot risk my health while my wife is vulnerable. It was a shield, a necessary protection against her wrath, though I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I hit send, instantly regretting the cowardice but needing the defense mechanism. I spent the morning trying to reconcile with Sarah. I found her in the nursery, sitting on the floor, folding tiny, immaculate onesies. She didn't look up when I entered. "I didn't go in," I whispered. She stopped folding, her hands hovering over a minuscule blue sleeper. "What?" I postponed. I told them I couldn't do it right now. "I chose us, Sarah. I chose you and the baby." The relief that flooded me was intoxicating. I walked towards her, expecting an embrace, tears of relief, something. Sarah slowly placed the sleeper down and stood up, looking down at me with an expression I'd never seen directed my way. Not anger, not even sadness, but a kind of clinical disappointment. "You think that's what this was about, Michael? About you choosing?" She walked over to her purse, which she had retrieved from the closet, and pulled out a sheaf of papers held together by a heavy clip. She slid them across the table toward me. "When I left here on Friday, I didn't just go to Chloe's. I went to a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. I went to the best family law specialist in the state." My blood ran cold. The papers were formal documents, a notice of intent to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, filed this morning. The date on the paperwork was stamped before I even sent my email, before I had officially made my choice. "You filed for divorce before I even told you my final decision?" I managed to choke out, staring at the legal jargon that now dictated my life. Sarah met my eyes, and the chilling truth spilled out, the twist that recontextualized every moment of the last week. I didn't leave because I was scared you might save your nephew, Michael. I left because I realized that you could not live without being the martyr. I knew you couldn't say no to Emily. I knew you would go through with it, even if it killed you, because you need to feel like the selfless hero for your sister. I knew that if you went through with the transplant, I would resent you forever for risking yourself for her son. And if you didn't go through with it, the guilt would destroy you, and you would resent me for making you choose. Either way, our marriage was over. I just decided to control the timeline and secure my position before you committed to being a biological hero somewhere else. I'm protecting our child from a broken, resentful, guilt-ridden father. The shock paralyzed me. She hadn't been negotiating my choice. She had been legally preparing for the consequences of my character flaw, the flaw she knew better than I did. My heroic sacrifice for Jamie would have resulted in the same outcome. Losing Sarah and my baby, but having the added burden of my sister's life debt hanging over me. The papers blurred before my eyes, the neatly typed legal language mocking the chaotic, raw reality they represented. Sarah hadn't been bargaining for my time. She had been preemptively securing the safety of our unborn child from the fallout of my intrinsic need to be a savior for my sister. My mind raced back over the last month. The ease with which I agreed to the transplant, the thrill of feeling noble, the absolute dismissal of Sarah's very real, primal fear for our pregnancy. I hadn't seen her fear as valid. I had seen it as an obstacle to my necessary heroism. She saw the inevitable end point that I was too blinded by my own ego to acknowledge. "You knew," I managed to say, the words catching in my throat, tasting like metal. "You knew I couldn't live with not helping him, and you knew I couldn't live with you leaving. So you took the third option, the one that lets you walk away clean with the high ground." Sarah didn't deny it. She leaned back against the counter, suddenly looking exhausted, the steely resolve momentarily cracking to reveal the woman I loved underneath the lawyerly armor. "Yes, Michael. I knew you. I knew you would choose the immediate, dramatic, publicly justifiable noble act over the quiet, sustained commitment required for a healthy marriage and a healthy fatherhood. I chose to mitigate the damage to our child. You think this was easy? Every time I looked at you, I saw Jamie's pale face, and I saw you already booking that operating room, and I knew our baby would grow up with a ghost of guilt sitting at the dinner table. I couldn't live with that potential future. The climax wasn't the operating room after all. It was the sterile, brightly lit kitchen, surrounded by miniature clothes that would never be worn by a child with both parents present. The tension didn't break with a scream. It snapped with the cold finality of a legal document. Then came the call. It was my mother, her voice frantic, barely coherent. "Michael, you need to come to St. Jude's now. It's Emily." They rushed her in. It wasn't Jamie's relapse, it was something else. A clot. They're saying she might not make it through the day. The world tilted again. The conflict with Sarah, the divorce, the ultimatum, suddenly became meaningless background noise. My sister, the one I was willing to risk everything for, the one whose life I felt ethically bound to save, was now facing death completely unrelated to the marrow donation. The universe had intervened with a cruel, swift irony. I looked at Sarah, my face surely reflecting utter confusion and dawning horror. The pressure to save Jamie was replaced by the immediate reality of losing Emily. I didn't know what to do. The immediate ethical obligation had vanished, replaced by a profound sense of loss and futility. "What about Jamie?" I asked Sarah mechanically, staring blankly at the divorce papers. Sarah stepped forward, picking up the papers and neatly stacking them. She slid them back into the folder, not giving them to me, but putting them away. "Jamie is still sick, Michael. He still needs you. But right now, your sister needs you more. Go to her." Her voice was soft now, stripped of anger, only the deep, empathetic tone of a nurse taking charge of a crisis. "We can deal with the divorce paperwork when you get back. But you cannot be absent for this last moment with your sister." I left immediately. I didn't look back at the nursery boxes. I drove to the hospital in a daze. Emily was unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped with terrifying irregularity. I sat by her bedside for hours, holding her hand, the very hand that had once bandaged my knee after I fell out of a tree when I was 10. I realized, watching the rise and fall of her shallow breath, that my desire to be the hero for my sister was a deep, unshakable reflex, a function of our shared history. Sarah hadn't been fighting against my love for Emily. She had been fighting against my inability to prioritize the new life over the old obligation. Emily passed away before dawn. Jamie is still waiting for a match. I returned to the house later that day. Sarah was gone. She had left a key on the counter and a short note taped to the fridge, right next to the ultrasound picture. It read, "The papers are filed. I need you to figure out who Michael is when he isn't saving someone else. When you know that man, call me. Until then, I'm protecting our son." I sit here now, exactly 1 month after the barbecue, looking at the papers, the empty house echoing around me. I saved no one in the end, not Emily, and not my marriage. I was too busy trying to perform an impossible act of salvation to see the foundation crumbling beneath my feet. I am left with the sterile knowledge that saving a life often costs you the life you built, and sometimes the choice you agonize over is irrelevant because fate simply decides to take what it wants anyway. The true dilemma wasn't who to save, but realizing that my need to be needed was what ultimately destroyed the one thing I truly needed. My wife beside me, building that future we planned. The silence is deafening, and I have no idea which phone number to call first, the lawyers or the transplant coordinators for Jamie.